All right, so let's try this again. Here we are going live on YouTube. This is probably the first time I've done this, and hopefully it's successfully. This is really off the cuff. I really don't have any plans about doing this, but here we're going to go. We're going to go ahead and build some glide apps. I'm going to try to keep my eye on the chat, but going back to the chat is going to be a little tricky for me as I'm building. So feel free to leave me comments below. I'll be happy to help you answer those questions in a minute. All right, so here, if you're not familiar with glide apps, it's basically a no-code software solution that lets you develop apps using nothing but a spreadsheet and some ingenuity. So I'm already halfway in the middle of this app here, and I'm doing some interesting things. Feel free to follow along with me. If you're one of my subscribers, one of my followers already, then we're gonna hit the ground running. All right, so this app I'm working on right now is called Proximity. It's an app for a client, and it's basically like an Indeed kind of app where we have users looking to find a job, right? And we have the ability for employers to go ahead and post that they have jobs available, and then job seekers to find those jobs that is closest to their house. All right, so right now I'm in the middle of building this events page here where we're going to be doing like job fairs. So the premise here is that we have an admin be able to create a new job fair. And so as I'm an app admin here, I can go ahead and add a new event, set a start and end time, where the event's located, and so forth. And then it'll appear here in the calendar. And then diving into the event, we have employers who can register for this event, and then eventually have app users be able to select one of the employers and then schedule an interview time that happens to fall between the start and end time. So I've developed most of this already. So here, this Robert Petito is the employer, this glide tester is an app user, and then we have an app admin. So if I'm a glide tester here, we see that I can no longer edit that value. And, I clicked on the location here. But if I'm the app, or if I'm the employer, then we see I can change my RSVP for this event. And if I'm an app admin, I can actually edit the job fair event altogether. So right now what I'm working on here is the ability for a app user to dive into one of the employers who are going to be at this job fair and select an interview time that happens to fall between 10:30 and 3:45 p.m. So the setup here is a little bit tricky, but basically what I have to do is create some values that represent this time. And I did that in the spreadsheet. So again, this is the spreadsheet that's feeding the app. And I have a section here called choices. And I'm going to really just kind of leverage these two columns here, this time value column and this time display column, where I'm giving every single time a value, starting from 0 and ending with 23.75, which happens to be in military time, 11:45 p.m. And so basically it's just increments of 0.25 for every 15 minutes. And then based on this time value, now I can use this for calculations to limit things in glide. All right, so the first thing I have to do is convert this start and end time to a value. And what's tricky here is that this 10:30 a.m. is really includes a date as well. Really, it's Thursday, July 29th, 10:30, and Thursday, July 29th, 3:45. So trying to find a way to convert this to a value like 10:30, I want this to be 10.5, means I have to do some math on this date time column. So in my glide data editor, in the events page here, I've started to do that. So here's my start time only, end time only, which I'm displaying in the app. And then I created this formula here using a math column. And what's nice about math columns in Glide, if you're not familiar, is that it prevents or it mitigates you needing to use complex formulas in a spreadsheet to achieve the same effect, and the calculations are instant, which is nice. So what I did is I took the hour of the start time, which is 10, plus the minutes of the start time, which would have been 30, and I divide that by 60. So we have 30 divided by 60, which is 0.5, right? If this had been 10:45, then 45 divided by 60 would have been 0.75. Right? So the hours plus the minutes divided by 60 gives me this 10.5 value. So now I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to create an end time. So this is going to be end to value. And again, it's going to be a math column. I'm going to paste that formula in, but instead of start, I'm going to do end. You see that it found this replacement for me because end time only is the only column that I have that starts with end. And precision 1.00 is fine. I should probably do the same thing over here to make sure. Yeah, it is. All right, so now we have this start to value and this end to value. All right, so now what I can do is create a choice component and limit to where this is the start and this is the end. All right, so let's pretend I am an app user, this Glide tester, and I want to set up an interview for this event. So I can dive into this particular employer, and I should probably have some information about the employer here. I think I already have a relation there, so we can do something quick, like relation to the employer, right? Maybe we call this employer information. Or maybe let's reverse that. Let's do employer name. We'll say tap to view more info. Tap to view, something like that. So they can tap this and then they can see more about this particular employer. All right, then we need to find a way to book this employer. So we'll probably need to have a form, and this form is going to write to this interviews sheet that I set up already. And in the interview sheet, I'm going to capture the ID of the event, the name of the event, the ID of the employer, name of the employer, user email is the person who is registering as or RSVPing to that employer. It should be an email column. The username, the date and time to which they're going to, the date and time that they're going to join that event. It's going to be a single date and time. Only going to give them 15 minutes per interview. So you don't need an end time or anything. We'll just calculate that. And so then this should be a date time column. And then we can allow them to upload a resume, possibly. Okay, so something like this. Then we're going to create a form button. And this form button, this will allow me to write to that interview sheet. And we could say schedule an interview. So we'll show a form, the interview request form. So when they push this button, we'll now have a form, and we're going to write to the interview sheet. And a lot of this information we're just going to pass along. So like the event ID. Let's see, we have to capture that because I don't think it's going to be here. Maybe it will. Let's see. So the event ID. Yes, I have that. Okay, so the event ID. Right to the event ID, the event name. part of that screen column. The employer ID and the employer name. So employer ID and then the employer name. And then the user email username. So user email. And then the username. The full name. All right, so now they're going to select a date and a time. And the date we already know is going to be that date of the event, and then the upload a resume. So we can do a file upload, file picker. We'll call this upload a resume. You can choose to make it required, but I'm going to leave that blank for now. All right, and so now here's this date time picker. So here's going to be a little bit tricky, is that we want to display times that are only between, again, 10:30 and 3:45. And Glide does not yet have a way for you to use this date time component and filter it to where it has to be on a specific day at a specific time range. They don't have that yet. So we kind of have to build it ourselves, which is fine. So what I'm going to do is use a choice component. And this, I'm going to reference the choices sheet where I have that column of time values and time display. And for the values, I'm going to choose time value, but I'm going to display time display. And so this column's going to write to the date time. Really, I guess it should just be time, but it's okay. All right, so when they select this, you see we have all the times between 12 and 11:45 p.m. Right, because I'm just pulling right now this master list of times. What we're going to do is we're going to filter this to the job fair time. All right, so to do that, this is not the event ID. This should be interview. Selection, choice, preference. Like that. All right, this is got to be a required field. And now we're going to filter. So we're going to filter where the time value is greater than or equal to the, let's see, right now we are in event ID. Oh, because we're in a form. Okay, so because we're in a form, I can't bring in that value yet. Because right now we're living in this no man's land of the actual interviews. So we need to pull in, yeah, I guess we can create our own form. I didn't really want to have to do that though. All right, so I guess what we can do is temporarily store the event ID as a variable in the user profile. Okay, so let's do this. Before I do that, let me actually copy, because I'm going to have to recreate this form. Okay, so I should have better. You should always just create a new action rather than choosing these onesie actions, because if you ever need to add a second thing, you have to start all over again. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is recreate that form. Interview request. Again, interviews, and then we're going to delete all and then paste. Oh, I didn't do all my extra stuff. Not the repeats. Okay. So event ID to event ID. Event name to event name. Employer ID. Employer name. User email. Username. Okay. All right, so what we're going to do is when they click on this button, we're actually going to write a value to a temporary column in our user sheet. Let's call this temp event ID. I'll make it user specific. It doesn't have to be, but make it user specific so that way it doesn't show up in the spreadsheet and confuse people if they're looking at the spreadsheet by itself. Okay, so then we're going to do a set column. And I might need to actually create another row here first. Yeah, okay, so hold on, save. So in this RSVP, I need a relation back to yourself. So I usually do that with current user email, the template column, where I can grab the current user's email. So that's the person I'm signed in as right now. And then let's do current user relation email. I'm going to relate the current user email back to the user sheet email, so then that way I can access this column here in my user sheet. All right, so now I can actually complete that action. I'm going to set not this item, but to the rel email I just created, and the temporary event ID is going to be the event ID. Save. All right, so now that I have, when I click on schedule an interview, I now have in my user sheet the event ID of that interview, or of the event. And so because of that, now I can pull in the start and end time. All right, so we'll call this event start value, via lookup. Oh, I got a relation first. Relation to event. We relate that event ID to the event's event ID. You see it found it. Now I can pull up the start value. So start value, look up with the start value and the end value. Look up the. All right, so the reason why I'm pulling this into the user profile sheet is because we can access the user profile sheet from any screen in the app. So this almost acts like our home base for storing variables and other kind of information. All right, so now I can place this filter. So our time value is greater than or equal to the user start value, and where time value is less than, and not doing less than or equal to, I'm doing less than, I'll show you why, the user end value. All right, so this, it ends at 3:45. So I don't want them to schedule a 3:45. They should schedule a 3:30. So that's why I'm choosing less than. So now, if I click on here, we see we have 10:30 to 3:30. Very nice. Okay, so let's have them schedule an 11 a.m. I'm going to skip the resume for now and hit submit. Cool. Eventually, maybe I'll have a section here that says like my interviews or some sort of calendar here. For now, I'm just going to make sure this logic works correctly. All right, so in my interviews, I now have all the information I need, except this date time column. Really, it's just a time column. Really, it's just a number column. All right, it chose 11. Okay. Maybe I should bring in the event date as well. That's okay. Okay, so this is kind of easy. I mean, luckily, we don't have to worry too much about things crossing over because all the interviews are only going to be 15 minutes long. So really, we just want to prevent any times from displaying here if it already exists. Meaning, if I'm somebody else, I should no longer be able to book in 11 o'clock. Okay. So you see I can still book an 11 o'clock here. So I have to add an additional filter. Let's figure out how to do that. So we need to do options and let's see where time value is not or is not included. Oh, we have this is a number. Maybe we should make it text. So is not included in. Possibly. Doesn't equal, let's see, I'm in the, doesn't equal, okay. So I'm still in the RSVP or the interview sheet here in this screen. And this is the current, this is the choices. So I don't want to tap into this. We tap into this. All right. So let's do this. We're going to go back to the data editor and we have the event ID. Let's grab all of the people who have booked this event ID, which right now is just the one. So we're going to say relation to self. We'll do relation to event ID. Not self. Something like this. I'm going to relate the event ID back to itself again in the interviews and match multiple. So we're going to grab, so basically this column now has all of the rows where people have booked. So for example, if I were to book a 12 o'clock, I now see in my interviews that I have 2 of them, and oops, did I do it in the wrong sheet? I did. Wrong one. Let's delete that. The interviews is where I wanted it. Okay, so rel self relate event ID to interviews, event ID, match multiple. Okay, so I see I found 2 things because those are the same event ID. And so now we're going to do a join list of this relation of the date time. Done. Let's convert this back to a text. 11 and 12. All right, what if I choose 115? Okay, so we have 12, 11, 12, 13.25. So these are the unavailable times. Okay, so now I should also now be able to filter based on that. So where time value doesn't equal, well, let's see, time value. Okay, because time value is still a number. Right? All right, let's do this. Time value string. This is a little trick I do sometimes using a template column to convert a number column to a text column. So I'm just going to do T and replace T with the time value. So you see it's the exact same thing here, but the difference is this column is recognized as text, as a string, or this is recognized as a number, an integer. Right? All right, so now I can filter where not time value, but time value string, there we go, doesn't include screen unavailable time. So it's not included in, I guess. It's not included in. So now 11, 12, and 130 should no longer be there. And hey, look at that. So 11's not there, 12's not there, and 115 is not there. All right, so let's book a 10:30. Submit. And now 10:30 is no longer part of the list. Hey, cool. That's cool. Okay, so a little ingenuity, a little hacking, right? Converting of columns and using values rather than actual time values and things of that nature to get it to work. Pretty cool. All right. So now we need to prevent users from being able to schedule more than one time, right? Okay, so if really it comes back down to this button. All right, so on this screen, the employer RSVP, we need to relate this to the interviews, and we have that via the event ID, employer ID. So event ID, employer ID. So we need to create like a unique key here between these two values. So let's create a new value called employer or event ID plus employer ID. Copy that because I'm going to type that again later. Get a template column, and it's going to do 1-2, but I'm going to replace 1 and 2 with the IDs. So the event ID and the employer ID. Done. So now we have this unique key here for that RSVP of the employer. And I'm going to do the same thing here for the interviews. So I'm going to do event ID, employer ID, template. It's got to match exactly. So 1-2, 2, 1 is the event ID, and 2 is the employer ID. And so now what we can do is see if this exists already for the person who signed in, then hide that button. And so to get it so that we're only looking at the currently signed in user is we need to create an if then else column here. And this is another trick I do all of the time as well. And basically I say if current user, or something like this, how about this? If my interview, then and so what we do is it's an if then else column, and we're going to check to see if the user email of that interview is the signed in user, meaning it's mine. Then I'll display the event ID, employer ID. Otherwise, I'm displaying nothing. So basically what this does is it filters this list to only my items, because if they're not my items, they'll be blank here. So for example, if I look at this as a different user, we see that it's blank because I'm not the signed in user. There we go. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and trash these 3 because I shouldn't have 3 interviews. And now what I can do is I can relate this event employer ID to the interviews, if my interview, then ID. And we'll know that I'm always going to relate to my interview for this event and this employer. Okay, so we're going to say rel my interview. And we're going to relate the event ID, employer ID to the interviews, if my interview, then ID. It's going to find just the one. So let's say, again, if I switch users here, it's blank because this person doesn't have an interview yet for this employer. All right, so this is basically a true false of whether or not they've applied already. And so now I can hide this button if the rel interview is empty. Okay. All right, so now that we have an interview, maybe we should have a button here that says something along the lines of what's your interview time is at. So I already have the relations. Now we can just do a lookup of the information here. So we can just do a lookup of our start time. And then this is still this is start time value. This is just going to be like 11.5. It doesn't really translate to anything pretty. So we need to get a time value, a better display. So we have that already in our choices component. So we're going to relate the time value start time value to our choices time value. And then we're going to look up start time. So we're going to do a lookup of the time value to grab the time display. All right. So we just related this number to this column, and we're looking up this value so that way we can display it here. All right. We're in a basic table. We call this your interview. Or yours, let's see. Well, maybe not a basic table. Maybe we'll do a hint text. Like you're scheduled to interview at, and then this, make it centered. All right, so then we should give them an opportunity to delete their interview in case they can't make it or something. A couple ways to do that. We can either bring them to their actual screen for their interview and then have them edit and then delete, or we could just build in a fancy delete bar here. Let's do that. Let's do it. Let's be fancy. So let's go like this. We're going to say cancel my interview. And when I push this button, I want to then display a confirmation so that way they don't accidentally hit the button. So I use a button bar for that. And we'll say let's see, cancel. Let's go back. Confirm. And let's go to icons. All right, so to toggle between these two values, we'll just do a true false. So we need to have a true false in here. It's going to be user specific. Brilliant. Come on. We'll call this "Are you sure?" cancel. All right, user specific. It's user specific, so that way somebody else can't confirm for me. All right, so hitting this cancel my interview, we're gonna set are you sure to cancel to be true. And then if they hit back, we will clear that value of the are you sure cancel, we'll just clear it. And then this cancel my interview will only show when are you sure cancel is empty. And we're going to show this button bar when are you sure cancel is true. All right, so now we have a toggle. Cancel my interview, back, cancel interview, back. Smoke and mirrors, smoke and mirrors. All right, so then confirm, what we'll do is do a couple of things. So we'll do a new action. Let's do 3 things. Let's first show notification. Oh, first let's go back. Then we'll show notification of interview cancel. And then we'll delete row. And we're going to delete not this row, because that's the for the employer. We're going to delete my interview. So delete my. Okay, so I should maybe have some details here as well. Maybe a calendar above it. Okay, so for my calendar of events, oh, maybe I don't want it here. It's okay. I'll do both. Be redundant. All right, so for this event, I want all of my interviews. So I need to relate the event ID to the interviews. And again, we only want my interviews. So create another column here. If my interview, then event ID. So if user email is the signed in user, then event ID else nothing. Let's be more specific with this one then. Let's do event ID plus employer ID. All right, so in this sheet now, I can relate to my interviews. Relate the event ID to that interviews if then else and match multiple. And now I should be able to display the calendar using that inline list. Look at that. It already knows my interviews. And if I got a calendar view where the start time is the lookup. Do I have that yet? Oh, I don't. Well, I need that. Otherwise, I can't do. Let's see. Okay, hold on. So all I have is this. That doesn't help me. I need to show the display again here too. All right, here we go. All right, so we're gonna rel time value. We're gonna relate date time. I gotta rename that to the choices time value string. down, and then look up time display. So let's rename this one here. This is just time value. Let's bring these things over. All right, so time value, relation to the time value, time display. All right, I don't know if it'll let me do this. Okay, so it recognizes 11 o'clock, but it doesn't recognize the date. It's going to just pull today because it doesn't know what date is associated with. And unfortunately, this date is generic. So we have the date start time, and we have my time. Let's see. I don't think there's a way to combine them. So maybe I won't do a calendar. Yeah, I don't need to show the date anyway. The date's already up there. So I'll just show a list. We'll just do a list. Maybe cards with no image. Oh, this is kind of cool. We can actually, here, if we use cards, then we can use like the employer stuff. We have the employer name already. Let's get the employer logo. Let's do relation to employer. I'm going to relate to the employer ID to the employer's ID. The reason why I use IDs and not the names is because if the employer ends up changing their name at all, then it breaks all the relations. So I'll just use the ID here. And then let's look up employer. So, all right, so back in my card view, under the avatar, I can display the employer logo, but right next to it, the employer name. And then the time display, like that. That looks good. Let's get rid of all this stuff above it. Hey, that looks good. All right, let's bring that to above this. Cool. Well, that's been really good. All right, so let's test this out. So if I am an app admin, right? And I want to, hold on, I shouldn't see this. That's not Are you sure cancel? It's empty and where my interview is not empty. Okay, same thing here. Options. We're going to show this if I have an interview. It should be my interview is not empty. All right, so I'm going to schedule an interview at 11:30. I can't do 11 o'clock because somebody else already has that. So I'll choose the next available time at 11:15. Submit. I can cancel if I want, but if I go back, now I see that 11:15. Cool. Let's add another employer. Let's call this employer. Mr. Target. Okay. So if I'm a new employer, I have this welcome screen. I'm an employer. I am Mr. Target. So employer name. I guess there should be a company name. Target. We'll just make up an address. Clear logo. Okay. Target logo. Okay. See. All right. Downloads. Desktop. Still downloading, huh? Can't be downloaded securely. What's so special about that image? All right, I'll do this one instead. Okie doke. Desktop. Download. Okay. So target. Play your phone. Sure. Fax. All right. So status is pending. Then the app admin can see that there's a new pending request and they can approve. All right, so now if I'm Mr. Target, I see that there is a new event. And I'm going to do a one-click employer RSVP. Boom. Now Target's there. That's fantastic. Target can change their RSVP. They can delete if they want. Okay, so now let's say I want to apply at Target. I schedule an interview. 11:45. Submit. Oh, I should also not be able to interview at the same time. Right? So right now I have an 11 o'clock. I shouldn't be able to schedule an 11 o'clock Target either. Ooh, that's going to be tricky. So right now I can do that. I got to build out this screen here too. That's ugly. All right, so Target. Oh, okay. I should also some colors. Yeah, I shouldn't be able to choose an 11 because I already had an 11. Target, schedule interview. Eleven 11:15. Oh, hold on. Oh, we're kind of, actually, you know what? We're actually kind of halfway there already. Because here I can't choose an 11 or an 11:15. because they already exist here, but for this employer. Because again, remember when you click on this button, we're sending the event ID here. And this is not included in unavailable times. So time value string is not included in unavailable times. And so this unavailable times is showing up here. But I think it's because I just chose the event ID and not this employer event ID. So I need to adjust this. Unavailable times should be this relation event plus employer ID. Okay, so like the values of this thing back to itself. Done. Well, I still don't get me what I want. I guess it does. Okay. Okay. So I just need my unavailable times. So I already have the event ID. I have a relation to the event. I need to have a relation to my interviews. So relate this temporary event ID to the interviews if my ID. Match multiple. And then let's grab all of the times I'm already interviewing in a join list. So join list, my unavailable times, my interviews time value. Done. All right, so I can't choose an 11, right? Okay. So I shouldn't be able to choose an 11 because I already have an 11 here. So I should be able to add one more filter now, and where time value string is not included in, and not the screen anymore, but now the user, my unavailable times. There we go. Look at that. Cool. All right. So now I can't choose an 11 o'clock because I already have an 11 o'clock, but I can choose 11:15. I'll do back-to-backs. Submit. Cool. 11, 11:15. All right. And then I should sort this list by the time value. All right. So then that way, if I cancel, yeah, I need to fix that. All right. So if I cancel my target interview, and instead schedule the interview for 10:30, this one should appear on top. Yep. Cool. All right. That looks good. 10:30 and 11. That's awesome. And maybe what I should do here is have you upload a resume like in your settings page. And so then that way, when you go to schedule interview, we could automatically bring that in as a default. That'd be kind of nice too. Add a note for that. Well, let's do it now. Why not? All right, I'm going to cancel my target interview. Oh, yeah. Okay. So here under like my profile, let's do a file picker. I'm gonna write that somewhere, don't I? Resume. That's be a link. Okay, we like upload your resume here. So pick something random. A resume on here? What did I do? Maybe I do. Okay, close. Okay, so now if I go to this job fair and I want to apply at Target, schedule interview, now I can have this default value be, oh, not to, hold on, this here. Upload resume, default value can be my user resume. Look at that, that's cool. Okay, so 10:30, submit, boom. Now that resume is already there. That's fantastic. Okay, that's enough for today. In the future here, I'm going to go ahead and adjust this screen to make it look something similar to this, where I can see when I'm scheduled and cancel my interview. It's a way to cancel my interview here and see my confirmed time and that kind of thing. And then the next step with this is to have employers come in and see which people are scheduled to interview on this job fair site, right? Because right now we're only in the user's side, just this glide tester, right? But if I view as an employer, right, I should have a button down here that says like view my interviews or something, right? Maybe it's a separate button underneath this. Maybe I'll change this button here to something else. Maybe we don't need to see this if you are an employer, or maybe make it smaller or something like that. But yeah, I was to see all of my interviews for this particular job fair here. Maybe it's its own screen. I don't know. We'll see. But that's where we're currently at. So hopefully you've learned something. Hopefully this wasn't a whirlwind for you. But as always, if you have any questions, feel free to leave me a comment below, and we'll see you next time.